Steffi, for having us. It's a great pleasure. You know, I'm a big fan of DLD.
I'm a big fan of you.
Yeah, I know. You could name that. And we really hope to have some interesting insights here. You know, the situation is the best that we could have. We have two very dynamic people from those two very major networks that we have, the ICT industry and the energy sector. And you've already been introduced by Steffi, but let me mention that Victoria on the one side is very interesting in her career changes. She has a PhD in quantum, which I have always admired sincerely. And then she has been in the ICT industry. She has been working for Microsoft and Oracle and also one other company. So she has deep insights here. This is why E.On hired her. So she really knows what she's talking about at this intersection and is personally very committed to sustainability. With Mr. Haas here, with Markus, you have been in the industry for 20 years. You've seen in the no one else. You really know what's going on. And you've really done a major step in taking the company forward because, as you will see, we will discuss two sides of this. One is you enabling other industries. I mean, if we have this big challenge of getting Germany climate neutral, the other one is what you've achieved with your own companies. Maybe, Victoria, we can start with you. We've already discussed a bit outside. If we take this big vision from vision to reality and what we look at what you as a network are doing in order to enable customers on their journey to climate neutrality.
Yeah, first, thank you very much for having me here. I think DLD is incredible, so I'm really honored to be here, and I think Steffi has really created something which is a big, big value for all of us. So Steffi, thank you very, very much. It's really great. Yes, climate neutrality and what can we do for our customers? I think there are a lot of aspects, and one thing which touched me. Looking today, there was one picture of thrown away food, and I felt a little bit about this, like being a physicist by education. I felt, yes, we throw away electrons. I mean, we throw away so much power because we don't use it in the right way. And actually, do we distribute it in the right way? Especially if you look into the future, if you think we want to create our energy in a way that respects our resources, to do it in a sustainable way, how do we actually treat the distribution? How do we treat the consumption? And how do we avoid waste? And this is actually what we are trying to do the best way. And perhaps starting with this waste thing, because I love this so much, because I said this, if you want to explain why is it really cool to work for an energy company, it's like answering the question, why is steel really good for a good beer? And this, why is steel really good for a good beer? Because steel production actually creates a lot of energy, heat, and the waste heat usually goes somewhere into the waste. Now the waste heat goes into producing nice beer, and E.On is actually facilitating this, is making it possible. And I think that's so nice. If you now drink a Königspilsner, a nice German beer, you think it's actually coming because Germany is also producing steel. So that's circular in a way. It's really saving energy. And this is the first thing. I think the second thing is, what do? We have networks, and this is what we have in common. You have different networks. We have energy, we have power networks, we have gas networks. And I think if you look at how do we distribute sustainable energy, and that's actually a completely different question than distributing the energy we had before, fossil energy, because we have so many more sources of energy which we need to combine, put together towards an orchestra of energy. And this is something where we really go step by step. We are already connecting 800,000 PV roofs towards our networks, and there are many, many more to come. And this is a journey of communication and digitization, where I think we have a lot in common.
Yeah, exactly, Victoria. As you mentioned, you're doing it jointly. Markus, you're also a great enabler. It's very important to have both those grids that you. How would you comment on how you enable the transition for other industries or other customers?
Well, the telecommunications industry was a vertical industry, and we're becoming now horizontal. We will connect everything, so we will become the glue of all industries vertically. So we always say we are becoming the trampoline of the industries. The better our networks are, the better the German society and the industry can jump. So from that perspective, as we are in a high investment cycle now, we invest roughly 17 to 18% of our revenue on an annual basis. And clearly, the possibilities of 5G that we currently roll out and what we also currently see in Munich at the IAA, where we have distributed the 5G network for the whole trade fair here in Munich and for the city, are amazing. So what we are going to see going forward is that clearly not only people will be connected, all machines, all sensors, and clearly production will also become completely 5G enabled. And our industry will become a huge part of the solution in order to be sustainable. If we would really accelerate on digitalization, according to Bitkom, until 2030, we could reduce CO2 emissions in Germany by 60%. If we then deduct the impact of digitalization, because clearly also our industry has a negative footprint, the net effect would be 30%. So it's a huge opportunity that we have in Germany. If we would now really accelerate and connect all things and avoid traffic, avoid energy consumption, we could play a huge role and get our step as Germany, as a country, to get CO2 neutral significantly faster.
But may I ask you one thing directly? You're talking about speed, agility. Is it about is it about you? Is it about the customers? Is it about state rules, bureaucracy? But what are the biggest threats exactly for this speed that you demand?
Well, from our perspective, is on the one side is COVID has clearly accelerated, and I would agree to the panel before that Corona has boosted the digitalization efforts. But clearly, it's not only digitalization. If you would, for example, build a 5G factory, you would clearly need to completely change your processes, because a 5G factory in itself wouldn't change anything. You need to have a mobile production area. You need to put all your data into the cloud. So from that perspective, it's a huge transformation. But the networks in itself could really avoid a lot of traffic, could clearly enable and accelerate production, especially. But also on small parts. I think the whole sharing industry and the whole sharing economy relies on connectivity. So I think it needs, from my perspective, a huge effort. It's not only the networks. On top, I think we clearly need to change the whole processes and the transformation processes in company itself. Okay.
Are you satisfied with the speed you have, or do you share these thoughts?
Well, I think I'm even more dissatisfied with the speed. Because I think on the one hand, especially in Europe, we have produced these big, hairy goals for sustainability, saying we want to be carbon neutral. So if we are then honest with each other, in the moment 5% of the energy we need for transportation is sustainable, the rest is non-sustainable. Even where we would think we are really great in electricity is around 40% sustainable. And we are talking about 2020, which has been a corona year with lower production. So probably in between, we are around 25-27% sustainable in the energy we use as societies in Europe. So if you want to change this, there's a lot of things we actually really need to do, and in best case we should have done, because we are not fast enough. The one thing is we need to avoid wasting energy and distributing energy to the wrong places. So we need to learn much more about who is using energy where. We need to project it, and for that we need data. We need connectivity, we need data, and we also need the information from the end consumers, which a lot of legislations in Europe don't allow in a way that we could model. On the other hand, we also need to build renewables. And a lot of legislations against in Europe are not really helpful in building renewable power plants. Again, if you look at the numbers, if you think we want to stay in industrialized society, we really have a lot of things to do. And this is partly about digitization, but secondly, it's about being able as a society in Europe to afford the infrastructure we need, not just for power, but also for information.
Yeah. I think we should absolutely come back to that, not only because I'm a professor for finance and financing this is a huge challenge, but may I ask you, if we're talking about speed, I mean, you mentioned data, how much do innovations like artificial intelligence, in the field of artificial intelligence, in the IoT sector, in other fields, help you with this aim?
I think a lot. I think first, it's giving us a chance to understand our challenge and to step by step solve the challenge. So if you look, we built some modulation on how sustainable it is, which community in Europe. Where do we create more sustainable energy? Where do we use it? And we actually make it in a way that we make it accessible to all the communities in order to learn, hey, as a community, how can I be self-sustaining? What do I need to do to become better? How innovative are my people? So I think the first thing is understanding, really deeply understanding. The second is then being more proactive, really learning in artificial intelligence how much energy is generated, under which weather conditions, on which mountain. If you model this in the right way, you can also model in the right way how do you want to store it, how do you want to distribute it. Then you can do the right tariffs. So again, that's a second layer on how much can be learned. And I think the third layer is, and that's going to be the really interesting layers, where we might revisit quantum computing then, and I finally come back to the interesting things of my youth, is if we have big cities who are switching towards e-mobility, the big challenge, obviously we don't have much sustainable generation in big cities, but we are going to have 100,000 of cars at the same time trying to load in the city overnight, which will be super interesting for networks, super interesting for any AI, and this is where we absolutely need AI, and we absolutely need the data to understand what's happening, because otherwise we just won't be able to charge our cars.
And I think this is a whole innovation network that is important, and it's developing on all sides. Markus, you have been, apart from how you're helping other industries and how you're helping Germany as such of being climate friendly, you have had a huge success in taking O2, taking Telefónica into the sustainable world. Maybe you comment on your own journey, with your own company.
Well, we are also on the journey currently. We've given ourselves a target latest by 2025. We want to be CO2 neutral. We are on a good way. Already today we source 100% of our energy is green energy. And clearly, if customers use us, every gigabyte you use is clearly completely carbon neutral. So from that perspective, we are completely supporting. But clearly we also need to invest. For example, 5G is 90% more energy efficient than 4G. So we are also in a constant investment cycle by renewing our network, installing new technologies, new standards, and clearly that's part. This year, for example, we switch off 3G, was a very inefficient technology from a data point of view. So a gigabyte consumed on 3G was maybe one of the worst. But now with 4G and especially 5G, we are going into a new era. But while we also see that data consumption is increasing, we are also need to evolve and cannot stop there. So we need to accelerate even more. But as an industry, from that perspective, latest by 2025, we will achieve our target. And that clearly also helps other industries who use our network in order to support their efforts is a positive contribution to their plans.
Yeah. But Markus, doing so, you just mentioned investment again. And I think what the two of you share in common is not only that you're so important for other industries, but also that you have to take huge strategic, long-term decisions as far as your grids are concerned, that are very costly, highly risky, and you need huge amounts of money. As we said, maybe we could discuss that aspect, whether you have the enough data points, the security to do so, or how we could mobilize more capital, in order to have the infrastructure that we need and to have it in time, because we spoke about speed.
Absolutely. So if you look about the mobile and the fixed infrastructure in Germany, I think it's not a secret that we are in a catch-up mode. Clearly, this is to a certain degree homemade because Germany has always auction frequencies. Yeah. So our industry spent 66 billion euros in the last 20 years. Just for frequencies, just for a sheet of paper. Other countries in Europe like Spain or Sweden or the Netherlands have been smarter, so they have given rollout obligations against frequencies, and from that perspective the infrastructure is much more advanced. So there's clearly also a big hope for the next government, and the current government has already passed a law that in the future spectrum could also be extended in exchange much more ambitious rollout targets could be given to the industry. Because this is not only for our industry good, I think we need the best infrastructure in Germany. We are a high-cost country, and that from that perspective, if we don't have the best infrastructure, we will not also be able to drive all these innovations. So I think this is clearly a hope or an expectation for the next government, that we will not auction against spectrum, because that's the biggest uncertainty we have. Clearly, we need to invest a lot of money into networks and network elements, into antennas. But from that perspective, if we look in all the investments that have been done, could be a clear game changer for Germany in order to really get to the best infrastructure that we all need in fixed and in mobile.
Yeah. But do you feel that there's a public awareness how much regulation in the end affects the quality, of our infrastructure, the quality of services customers can get?
I think if you would now ask if people would rather look for a high-cost auction or the best infrastructure, even after COVID, I think voters would clearly say that we need the best infrastructure and we get more awareness. But you're right, in the past, there was not so much awareness. Why, for example, we are a little bit behind in some areas in Germany. But I think the current government has changed it, has taken a law now, has brought it forward, and we clearly hope that the next government will carry on going on that path.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think governments also do what the public perception is in a way. So I think that's a big step forward. Victoria, you have exactly the same problem of these massive investments that you need. How do you deal with this, and how do you feel about challenges?
Yeah, I think first, yes, massive investments. And I think probably even more so, with all respect, because the infrastructure for power grids, it's far older. So if you look into it's working, it's reliable, it has been optimized and built for a completely different centralized production. So actually we come from a history from centralized production. Now overnight, it feels like overnight, we switch off more or less all centralized big power production units, and we go into 100,000 and millions of small decentralized units, which are not that reliable because they depend on sun, they depend on wind, they depend on water, which is completely different from old-fashioned coal and gas plants or nuclear plants. So this is a change where the infrastructure is coping. It's coping. If you look into the future, and I talked about e-mobility, if you look into the future and we talk about electrification of a lot of industrial applications, this means we're even going to need more power. What does this mean for our infrastructure? We need not just more copper, which is scarce anyway in the ground, but we need digitization. And I think this is a discussion with the regulation, which same as you, I really hope we will continue with the regulators in the different European countries, because this really needs the understanding how much we really as a society need to invest into a flexible network which is able to cope with decentralized, with a flexible management of resources, because otherwise we won't be able to keep a stable frequency in our networks. It's costing money, and we need to, this is really long-term projects, like 20, 30 years. So there needs to be a predictable return on investment.
Yeah. I think what you also have in common both is that somehow, your services are taken for granted. You're important grids, and customers think that you're there. So you're fighting at various sides. You're, about public awareness with the regulators, etc. But one thing is also that you're trying trying to make the consumer understand the necessity to create some consumer awareness for circular economy and for all this. Did you think what are the major steps both of you are taking in that field, and what are your, so to say, the experiences you made here?
I think the first thing is really explaining, and this is why I said, for example, we have this overview of green energy, how it's produced. You can choose your tariffs, so really creating tariffs where people have the freedom to choose and to understand what they are choosing. So green is not just green, but there are different green tariffs. But this is the first layer. I think the second layer is about helping customers understand their carbon footprint. This is where we're doing a lot. And the third layer is enabling them to be a prosumer or flexumer, so giving their flexibility, like when do they want to load their car, when do they want to operate which household appliances, could they lend us a battery for hard times, really change the role of a consumer to a prosumer. And I think this is only possible with smart meters and with an exchange of data, which currently in our energy system is relatively difficult due to regulation. And this is something where I think we also need to go the next step. If we want to orchestrate these flexible, decentralized networks, we need to share more data. We somehow need to share control in a fair way, because it's a circular economy. It's different than it had been before.
Markus?
So there are different parts in the value chain. Clearly, in the production and network, we clearly install now solar panels on our mobile sites. But the awareness from the consumer sides, we sell millions of smartphones every year, but on recycling really scarce resources, we are not doing well in Germany. So everybody knows you have at home 3, 4, or 5 smartphones, someone that you don't use. But we tried really hard to have incentive programs to pay for recycling. But we need to improve here, because we need these scarce resources for the next smartphone you buy. What we clearly see, that renewal cycles of smartphones have slowed down. So smartphones are now used more 3 to 4 years rather than 1 to 2 years. So that clearly helps. But clearly on recycling, we could improve more. On the value the value acceptance by consumers, we clearly see that good infrastructure, the appreciation also to pay more for certain tariffs, is still not very strong. So we also offered certain tariffs where if you pay a little bit more, you have guaranteed CO2 neutrality. So from the acceptance that we see, and if you ask polls how important climate neutrality is, then if it comes to deciding for a certain tariff, there's still also a gap in perception versus reality that we see. So this is clearly an area where we need to improve.
No, but I think it's great that, fighting for a circular economy and for this concept, you're also, looking after all these aspects of awareness. May I ask you, if you're looking into the future and you could wish something exactly for this, the title of our panel, that we're coming from a vision to a reality, do you feel and you're at a wish-free, is it some little steps you're looking for that you say that we must do as homework, or is that one big jump, one moonshot that would be possible? What would be your biggest wish moving forward from both your sides?
Well, I think there's enough money to invest in the country. I think from our perspective, the current regime of regulation that we have in our industry, that would clearly accelerate us. So I think we could clearly roll out and get even faster to nationwide 5G networks if the frequencies next year would be extended. So these are small things. Or for example, if we wouldn't need building permissions for mobile sites. So if we could just build sites as in other countries, because 99.5% of mobile sites are anyhow approved. So from that perspective, it doesn't cost money, but I think to unlock the value of investment, and that's clearly also important for next government, that we have planning security, so that the rules of the games are not changed, because as you mentioned, we have long-term investment cycles. We invest billions every year. And from that perspective, it's important that in the country, we have a clear planning security on key investments going forward. So it's not a lot we ask for, but they could really change the game.
Yeah, but it would be a big change. And as you said, it wouldn't cost money, which makes it, even more, wishable that we should have it. I really share this. Victoria, if you could have asked for something.
Yeah, I think, and this is particularly a German wish. Germany has a really high power price, one of the highest in the world. And the biggest part of this actually is taxes and things related around some tax-like structures. And now we have CO2 pricing, etc., which is also tax-like structure. If we want to change this, we need to make power still affordable, but we need to pay more for our infrastructure. If the infrastructure for the Green Deal is not affordable for investors because the return on investors is not high enough, it's not going to happen as fast as we need it. So first, we need to have a high return on invest on the infrastructure, but this shouldn't go directly to the consumers, but this should also be taken into account with all the tax structures we have on top of the power tariffs.
But Victoria, you said this is a German wish, and you're one of the most international managers I know. If you had one international wish, what would that be?
Actually, make it easy to build wind and solar and get more acceptance with anybody. I know wind is not really nice. I know solar is somehow not, if you look into a village and it has all solar roofs, it's not beautiful. But actually a nuclear power plant also hasn't been beautiful. And we still had it. And I'm not talking about coal power plants, they really are not beautiful. So we need to take this leap as a society to allow generation of sustainable energies. If we don't take this leap, we won't have it. And then we either are deindustrialized or we are not sustainable.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for your insights. I think all of us have taken something home because I think it's a joint effort, yeah? All of this, and it's an ecosystem, and I think it's also very optimistic to see both of you as networks working here together and, you know, us all building something like a circular economy here. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.